The city was waking up slowly, the soft hum of early morning traffic blending with the faint sound of birds trying to compete with the machines. People hurried along the sidewalks, some with purpose, others just drifting through the day without much thought. In a small corner of this sprawling city, a little coffee shop was opening its doors. Its windows fogged slightly from the warm air inside, and the smell of fresh coffee drifted out to the street, inviting anyone who walked by. Behind the counter, she moved with practiced ease. She had been working here for a few years, and though the work was simple, she loved it. She liked the rhythm of making coffee, the way the machines hissed and steamed. Most of all, she liked the small moments when she could connect with people. Even in a city full of strangers, she believed in little sparks of kindness, the kind that made someone's day just a little better. She wiped down the counter, arranged the pastries neatly, and made sure the coffee beans were ready for grinding. Everything had to be perfect, even in the quiet of the morning before the rush began. It was just past 8 when the first customer appeared, a young man in a neatly pressed suit carrying a leather briefcase. He looked serious, almost tense, as if the weight of the world rested on his shoulders. He glanced at the menu but didn't order immediately, instead staring out the window like he was lost in thought. She approached him with a warm smile. "Good morning. What can I get started for you?" she asked, her voice soft but friendly. He blinked and seemed startled, like he hadn't realized anyone was speaking to him. Just a black coffee." "Extra hot," he said, finally focusing on her. "Coming right up," she said. Already moving to prepare it, as she worked, she noticed him glancing around the small shop. His eyes seemed to take in every detail, the worn wooden tables, the little chalkboard with the daily specials, the pictures on the wall that no one paid attention to anymore. There was something in the way he looked, a mix of curiosity and exhaustion. When the coffee was ready, she carefully handed it to him. "Here you go. Be careful. It's hot." He took the cup, holding it carefully as if it were fragile. "Thank you," he said quietly, almost under his breath. There was a pause, and then he added, "Do you come here often?" She laughed softly, shaking her head. "I work here, so yes, I see people like you every morning. Most just grab their coffee and go." He smiled faintly, a small, tired smile that didn't reach his eyes. There was something about him that made her curious, a story hidden behind those sharp, serious features. For the next few days, he became a regular. He would come in at the same time, order the same coffee, and often sit by the window, staring out at the city. She noticed small things about him, the way he tapped his fingers on the table when he was deep in thought, the faint lines around his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights, the subtle sighs he let out when he thought no one was watching. She started leaving little notes with his coffee. Small messages like, "Have a great day," or "You've got this." At first he didn't respond, but one morning, he left the coffee cup on the counter with a small note of his own. "Thanks. It helps more than you know." That small exchange changed something. From that day on, there was a quiet connection between them. He began talking to her, slowly at first, about small things, the weather, the city, a new pastry that had come in. She laughed at some of his dry, subtle jokes. He found himself looking forward to their conversations more than he expected. One morning, the city was covered in a soft drizzle. The streets were wet, reflecting the dim light of the morning sky. He came in as usual, but this time he was distracted, his usual calm replaced with tension. As he reached for his coffee, he didn't notice that the cup was slightly overfilled. It tipped, and coffee spilled across the counter and onto his sleeve. "Oh no," she exclaimed, rushing to help him. She grabbed a cloth and started wiping the spill. "I'm so sorry. Are you okay?" He looked down at the mess, his usual composed demeanor faltering for a moment. "It's fine," he said, though his tone was more surprised than annoyed. She worked quickly, cleaning up and handing him a fresh cup. "Here, this one's perfect," she said with a reassuring smile. He looked at her, and for a moment there was no need for words. Something about her energy, her calm in the middle of the chaos, struck a chord deep inside him. He realized he hadn't felt this at ease in years, not since the world outside had started to feel too heavy. Over the next weeks, their conversations grew longer. She learned bits about his life, though he was careful not to reveal too much. He was always polite, always respectful, but there was a softness to him that few people saw. She noticed the way he frowned sometimes when he was thinking, the way his eyes lit up when he found something interesting to talk about, the way he seemed to carry a quiet loneliness with him. For him, the coffee shop became a refuge. It was a small corner of the world where he could be himself, even if only for a few minutes each morning. He started looking forward to her smile, to the sound of her voice, the way she made the ordinary feel special. One particularly rainy morning, she noticed him shivering slightly as he entered. She quickly brought him a warm towel and offered him a cup of tea, something a little different from his usual order. He accepted, surprised by the thoughtfulness. "You always know what I need," he said softly, a rare vulnerability in his voice. She shrugged, smiling. "I just pay attention. That's all." It was in these small moments, the shared smiles, the quiet conversations, the little acts of care that something began to grow between them. It wasn't dramatic or sudden. It was slow, gentle, and real, like a tiny spark catching light in a dark room. Neither of them fully realized it yet, but their lives were starting to change, one small interaction at a time, as the city carried on outside. Full of noise and rush, the coffee shop remained a quiet haven. In that little space, two lives from completely different worlds were beginning to connect. One was a girl who found joy in simple moments and small acts of kindness. The other was a man used to control, responsibility, and a life that rarely allowed him to breathe. Together, they began discovering something neither of them expected, that in the middle of a busy city, love could quietly, softly, and unexpectedly take root. The mornings continued in their rhythm. She would prepare the coffee, greet the customers, and smile at him when he arrived. He would order his coffee, sometimes say a few words, sometimes just sit in silence. And yet, with each passing day, the space between them grew smaller, the connection stronger. It was unspoken, yet palpable. It's like a delicate thread slowly weaving their hearts together. It was on one ordinary day that he stayed longer than usual. The coffee shop was quiet. Only a few regulars scattered at the tables. He asked her about her dreams, her family, the things she loved outside of work. She answered cautiously at first, then with growing warmth. Sharing bits of her life she hadn't told anyone before. He listened intently, genuinely interested, not just as a polite gesture, but because he wanted to know her. And in that moment she realized that he was more than just a customer. He was someone who saw her, truly saw her, in a way few people ever did. The rain outside had stopped, leaving the streets glistening. Sunlight peeked through the clouds, casting a soft glow over the shop. They didn't notice it at first, too caught up in the conversation, in the laughter that had come so easily between them. It was a rare, precious moment, the kind that stays in memory long after the day has ended. As he finally stood to leave, he looked at her and said, "Thank you. For today, for everything," she smiled, a gentle, quiet smile. "Any time," she said, meaning it more than words could express, and as he walked out into the city, his briefcase in hand, he carried with him a warmth that no money, power, or title could ever give. It was a simple, human warmth, born from kindness, connection, and the start of something neither of them fully understood yet. The city continued to move around them, fast and unforgiving, but in that small coffee shop, a new story had quietly begun. A story that would grow, face challenges, and change both of their lives in ways they could never have imagined. And it all started with a cup of coffee, a smile, and a moment of genuine human connection. The days passed quickly, each morning bringing the familiar rhythm of the city and the comforting routine of the coffee shop. She moved behind the counter with the same ease, grinding beans, steaming milk, and arranging pastries just so. But lately, her mornings had taken on a different color. There was a subtle anticipation in her steps, a quiet excitement she couldn't quite explain. She found herself glancing at the door more often, hoping to see him enter, briefcase in hand, tired but familiar smile on his face. He had started coming in at slightly different times now, no longer strictly at 8, as if unconsciously trying to catch her attention or to have a few more moments in her company. Each time he came in, there was a small change in the air. a tiny shift that made everything feel warmer. He would order his usual coffee, but lately, he had begun asking her questions about a pastry she had made, not about the little details of the shop, or even about how she was doing. It was subtle, polite, almost casual, but she noticed. She noticed everything. One day the shop was unusually quiet. The morning rush had passed, leaving a few scattered customers quietly reading or typing on their laptops. She was wiping down a table near the window when the bell above the door jingled. She looked up and saw him standing there, slightly out of breath, his hair damp from the light rain outside. "Morning," he said, his voice carrying a tired warmth. "Good morning," she replied, smiling as she approached. "Rough day?" He shrugged, setting his briefcase down. "You could say that." "Meetings started earlier than I expected, and I barely got a chance to grab breakfast." She nodded sympathetically, already preparing his coffee. "Well, you're here now. That's what matters. Take a moment to breathe." He watched her as she worked, noticing the little things, the way she moved, precise and careful, the way she hummed softly under her breath, and the faint crinkle in her eyes when she smiled. There was a calmness about her that seemed to pull him in, a quiet strength that contrasted sharply with the chaos of his world. As she handed him the cup, he looked at her, hesitating slightly. "You know," he said quietly, "I didn't realize how much I needed this. Not just the coffee. This little pause in the day. I didn't realize how much it mattered." She felt a warmth spread through her chest. "I'm glad," she said softly. "Sometimes a small break can make a big difference." He took a sip, letting the warmth of the coffee seep into him. He watched the rain outside, listening to the soft patter against the windows. And for the first time that morning, he felt a sense of peace. It was fleeting. Of course, his world was still filled with meetings, deadlines, and expectations, but it was real. It was enough for the moment. Over the next few weeks, their interactions grew in depth. He began sharing small pieces of his life, things he hadn't told anyone else. Not deeply personal, not yet, but enough to hint at the man behind the sharp suits and serious eyes. He spoke about his work, the challenges he faced, and the occasional loneliness that came with success. She listened, offering encouragement, a smile, or a simple word of understanding. She, in turn, shared her own world with him. Not her deepest secrets, not yet. But the small joys of her daily life, the way the morning light looked through the coffee shop windows, the laughter of children passing by, the satisfaction of a perfectly made cup of cappuccino. She didn't realize it at first, but these small exchanges were building a bridge between their worlds, connecting them in a way that neither of them fully understood. One morning, he arrived earlier than usual, carrying a small stack of papers. He looked harried, his brow furrowed, and his tie slightly askew. She noticed immediately and offered him a seat near the window. "Take a moment," she said, placing a cup of coffee in front of him. "Don't let work follow you in here." He gave a small smile, grateful, and sat down. For a few minutes he didn't speak, simply drinking the coffee and watching the city wake up. She busied herself behind the counter, glancing at him from time to time, just making sure he had everything he needed. Finally, he spoke. "You know," he said, "I think I've been forgetting something important. In all the rush, all the pressure, I forgot to notice the little things. The quiet moments, the people who make life easier, better." She looked at him, her curiosity piqued. "And what made you remember?" He hesitated, then looked directly at her. You make me notice. You make me stop and breathe. Even for a little while, I'm not overwhelmed. I feel like I can just be." She felt a blush rise to her cheeks, but she kept her tone light. "I'm glad I can help. That's what I'm here for, after all." Their conversation was interrupted by the door jingling again. A regular customer had arrived, breaking the quiet intimacy of the moment. He glanced at her, a small amused smile playing on his lips, as if sharing an inside joke that no words could capture. She smiled back, feeling a flutter of something she hadn't felt before. Later that week, he surprised her. Instead of ordering his usual black coffee, he asked her to make something different, something she liked. She hesitated, caught off guard, but then smiled. and prepared a drink she had been experimenting with, a delicate mix of flavors she thought no one would notice. He took a sip, eyes widening slightly. "This is amazing. How did I never notice this before?" She laughed softly, shaking her head. "You've been too busy with your world. It's nice to see you try something new, though." He looked at her, a playful glint in his eyes. "Maybe I need to slow down more often." It was in moments like these that she realized the connection between them was growing deeper. It wasn't just about coffee or small talk anymore. There was a subtle affection forming, a quiet understanding that neither had planned but both felt. But life outside the coffee shop was waiting. He was a man with responsibilities, obligations, and a world that demanded perfection. She was a woman with her own life, simple and grounded, but not without challenges. They were from different worlds, and yet, in the small corner of the city where their paths had crossed, those worlds began to intersect. One rainy afternoon, she noticed him sitting alone, staring out the window with a distant look. She approached carefully, not wanting to intrude, and offered him a warm pastry. "Here," she said softly. "It might help with the stress." He took it grateful. "You always know what I need," he said quietly, a hint of vulnerability in his tone. She smiled, feeling a deep sense of connection. "Maybe I just pay attention," she said, brushing off the comment lightly. They sat in companionable silence for a few moments, the rain outside creating a soft rhythm against the windows. He finally spoke, sharing a little about the pressures at work, the constant need to make decisions, and the rare moments when he felt truly alone. She listened, offering words of encouragement, and he felt a sense of relief he hadn't experienced in years. As the weeks went on, their relationship grew in subtle ways. He began noticing the little things she did, the way she laughed at small jokes, the careful way she arranged the pastries, the thoughtful way she remembered regular customers' preferences. She noticed the way he softened when he talked to her, the rare moments of humor and warmth that peeked through his otherwise serious demeanor. It was in the small gestures, the quiet exchanges, and the shared moments that their bond strengthened. He found himself looking forward to mornings at the coffee shop, not just for the coffee, but for her presence. She found herself thinking about him in the little breaks between customers, wondering how someone so different could fit so seamlessly into her world. One evening, after the shop had closed, he lingered outside. She stepped out to lock the door, and they found themselves standing together in the quiet street, the city lights reflecting off the wet pavement. "Thank you," he said softly, "for everything, for listening, for being here." She looked at him, feeling a warmth that went beyond words. "You don't need to thank me. I like being here. I like talking to you." He smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile. "I like it too, more than I expected." And in that moment, under the soft glow of the streetlights and the lingering scent of rain and coffee, something shifted. It wasn't a declaration, it wasn't a grand gesture, but it was real. A connection had formed, quiet but strong, built on shared moments, understanding, and the simple truth that sometimes people find each other in the most unexpected places. From that day forward, their mornings continued with the same gentle rhythm. But there was an unspoken closeness between them now. A smile here, a question there, a shared laugh that lingered longer than it should. They were learning about each other, discovering a world that neither had anticipated, and finding comfort in the simplicity of shared presence. And though the city outside continued to move with its usual pace, inside that small coffee shop, time seemed to slow. In those quiet moments, over cups of coffee and soft conversation, a heartwarming connection was growing, one that neither of them fully understood yet. But both felt deeply. The days continued to flow with the usual rhythm of the city. But for them, something had begun to change. The quiet moments in the coffee shop became richer, filled with unspoken understanding. Each smile, each shared glance felt heavier with meaning, though neither had yet dared to say it aloud. It was a subtle tension, a pull that made every interaction feel slightly more important, more charged. One morning he arrived later than usual. The sky was overcast, and the city seemed gray and sluggish, as if it too felt weighed down. He stepped into the shop with a furrowed brow, looking distracted. She noticed immediately, instinctively sensing that something was off. "Rough morning?" she asked gently as she prepared his usual coffee. He exhaled deeply, almost as if the sound alone could release some of his tension. "You could say that." "Things at work. They're complicated today," she nodded, understanding. She had begun to learn the nuances of his life, the pressures and expectations that came with it. It was a world so far removed from hers, yet here he was, seeking comfort in something as simple as a cup of coffee and a conversation with her. "You know," she said softly, handing him the cup, "sometimes stepping back for a moment helps. Even just a little. Don't let it all pile up." He looked at her, almost surprised by her words, and took a slow sip of the coffee. "It's funny," he said after a moment, "how you don't even know me that well. But you already seem to understand." She smiled faintly, brushing off the compliment, but inside, she felt a small flutter of warmth. "Maybe I just pay attention," she said lightly, though she knew it was more than that. Something about him made her want to understand, to notice the small details, the hidden emotions beneath his composed exterior. That day, the shop was busier than usual. The morning crowd had spilled into the late hours, leaving little time for quiet conversation. But even amidst the rush, their connection lingered in stolen moments, a shared smile, a gentle word, the brief brush of hands as she handed him his coffee. Each interaction was small but significant, leaving a lingering warmth long after he left. As the weeks passed, the challenges outside the coffee shop began to creep in. Gossip started to circulate, not openly, but in subtle, cutting ways. Colleagues began noticing his frequent visits, questioning why a high-profile man like him would spend so much time at a small, ordinary coffee shop. Some comments were harmless curiosity, others carried judgment. And he felt the weight of them pressing in, even if he didn't respond. She noticed the change in him. There were moments when he seemed distracted, tense, or withdrawn, as if carrying not just the burden of work, but the weight of opinion. She didn't fully understand, but she knew enough to offer quiet support. One afternoon, as the rain poured outside and the shop was nearly empty, she placed a warm pastry in front of him. "You've been quiet today," she said gently. "Everything okay?" He looked at her, his eyes tired but grateful. I didn't realize how much outside opinions can affect me. It's complicated." She nodded, her voice soft. "People will always talk, but that doesn't mean their words define you. You know who you are, and that matters more than anything else." He looked down at the pastry, then back at her, a small smile tugging at his lips. "You always know what to say," he murmured, almost in disbelief. "It's nothing special," she replied, though she felt a quiet satisfaction in seeing him ease just a little. Sometimes people just need someone to remind them that it's okay to be human. It was moments like these that made him realize how rare her presence was in his life. In a world where so much was calculated, controlled, and measured, she was genuine, effortless, and real. She didn't judge. She didn't expect. She simply existed in a way that made him feel safe, seen, and unexpectedly calm. But life outside the coffee shop was relentless. One afternoon, he received a call that demanded immediate attention, a situation at work that left him anxious and frustrated. He excused himself from the counter and stepped outside, pacing as he spoke in low tones into the phone. She watched from the window, feeling a mix of concern and helplessness. She wanted to be there, to offer comfort, but she also knew some battles had to be fought alone. When he returned, his face was tense, eyes flickering with exhaustion and worry. She poured him another cup of coffee, placing it gently in front of him. "Here," she said softly. "It might help you think a little clearer." He accepted it with a faint smile, gratitude in his eyes. "Thank you," he said quietly. "You always seem to know what I need." As the days passed, their connection deepened, but so did the challenges. She began noticing the subtle ways the world outside judged them, the curious stares, the whispered comments, the unspoken assumptions, and though he tried to shield her from it, she could sense the weight it brought. There were moments when doubt crept in, when she questioned whether they could truly belong in each other's lives without facing the friction of their different worlds. One evening, after the shop had closed, He lingered longer than usual. The air outside was cool, tinged with the scent of rain and the faint aroma of the city's evening bustle. She stepped out to lock the door, and they found themselves standing side by side on the quiet street, the glow of streetlights casting soft shadows around them. "I've been thinking," he said quietly, "about how complicated this is, about how different our worlds are." She nodded, her hands tucked into her jacket pockets. "I've been thinking about that too," she admitted. "It's not easy, but some things feel worth the difficulty." He looked at her, searching her eyes as if trying to find reassurance. "I don't want to lose this," he said, his voice low and serious. "I don't want to lose you." She felt a warmth spread through her chest. "You won't," she said softly. "Not if we both want it." It was a simple promise, but one that carried weight. Neither of them had said much about feelings before, but in that quiet street, the truth lingered between them, unspoken yet understood. They were beginning to navigate the delicate line between friendship and something deeper, a connection that both scared and thrilled them. The next morning, he arrived with a rare softness in his expression, a gentle smile that hinted at relief and hope. She noticed immediately, feeling a quiet joy at seeing him at ease. "Morning," she said, her voice carrying warmth. "Morning," he replied, settling in at his usual spot. "Better day," he added, his tone light but sincere. They spoke about small things, the city, the weather, a new pastry she had tried to perfect, but there was an undercurrent of something more profound. Every word, every glance, carried meaning beyond the ordinary. She found herself laughing more freely, noticing details about him that she hadn't before. From the way he crinkled his nose when amused to the faint lines that deepened when he smiled genuinely. But the world outside continued to impose its challenges. One afternoon, a colleague from his office called unexpectedly, their voice sharp and demanding, questioning his focus and commitment. He excused himself to take the call, and she watched as tension returned to his features. She felt a pang of frustration not at him, but at the circumstances that threatened to intrude on their fragile connection. When he returned, she offered him a warm smile and a cup of tea. "It's okay," she said gently. "Take your time." He looked at her, gratitude mingled with weariness in his eyes. "You make it seem easier," he said softly. "Even when things are complicated, you make it manageable." It was in these moments, when the world was harsh, demanding, and unyielding, that they discovered the strength of their bond. They were not just sharing coffee and conversation. They were creating a space where understanding, patience, and care could flourish despite the pressures outside. One rainy morning, as the shop filled with the scent of fresh coffee and damp streets, he lingered a little longer than usual, sharing a story from his past, something personal he had never revealed before. She listened intently, offering empathy without judgment. In return, he listened to her thoughts, dreams, and worries. Showing a rare vulnerability that deepened their trust, they began to realize that love, or at least the beginnings of it, was not about grand gestures or dramatic declarations. It was in the small, consistent acts of presence, the quiet understanding, and the willingness to see each other fully, flaws and all. The days were starting to feel heavier. The city had its usual rhythm, but for them life had begun to show its edges. What had started as quiet connection and warm smiles in the coffee shop was now tested by the pressures outside, the gossip and the unspoken judgments of the world around them. It was subtle at first, a few sideways glances, whispered comments, but it grew enough that both of them felt it in the corners of their interactions. One morning, he arrived later than usual, his coat damp from the drizzle outside. The city's streets were slick, reflecting the gray light of the early day. He stepped into the shop quietly, shoulders tense, and she noticed immediately. His usual calm presence was clouded with something heavier, a weight she had seen before, but never so clear. "Rough morning?" she asked gently, moving to prepare his usual coffee. He sighed, a long, slow exhale that seemed to carry the burden of the world. "You could say that," he said quietly. "Work. Everything feels heavier today." I can't seem to catch a break. She nodded, understanding. Here, try this. A little extra warmth might help, she said, handing him the cup, steaming and fragrant. She smiled softly, hoping the gesture would ease some of the tension she could see pressing down on him. He looked at her, eyes briefly softening, and took a sip. You always know what I need, he murmured, almost to himself. I just pay attention. She replied lightly, though inside her chest tightened. She wished she could do more, wished she could make the weight of his life a little lighter. But she also knew that part of him had to carry it himself. The conversation turned to ordinary things. The new pastry on the counter, the soft hum of the coffee machine, the rain pattering against the windows, but the tension never fully left him. She noticed the lines of worry around his eyes. It's the way his fingers drummed on the counter when he thought she wasn't watching. For her, it was both concerning and strangely intimate. She was learning the language of his life through small gestures, quiet habits, fleeting expressions. Later that week, a challenge arose she hadn't anticipated. A friend of his from work appeared at the shop unexpectedly, asking questions in a tone that was polite but probing, testing boundaries, hinting at judgment. He tried to handle it calmly, but she noticed the subtle stress settling in his shoulders. After the friend left, he lingered in a corner, staring at his coffee with a distracted air. She approached slowly, placing a hand gently on his arm. You okay? She asked. He looked up at her, the exhaustion and frustration mingling in his gaze. It's complicated, he admitted. People don't understand why I come here so often, or why I spend time talking with you. Her heart tightened at his words. Let them talk, she said softly. It doesn't change what's real between us. You know that, right? He nodded, but the tension didn't fully leave. I know, he said quietly, but it's still hard to ignore. The world outside has its own rules, and sometimes it feels like we're on different sides of them. She stayed beside him, saying nothing at first, letting him feel her presence. There was comfort in silence, in simply being together, even when the weight of life pressed in. After a moment, she spoke. Life is complicated, yes? But sometimes the right person doesn't make it simpler. They just make it easier to carry. He looked at her, something unspoken passing between them. He wanted to say more, to express the growing depth of feeling, but words felt inadequate. Instead, he simply nodded, a silent acknowledgement of the truth she had spoken. The next few days were quieter, filled with a gentle rhythm of coffee and conversation, but beneath the surface. Both of them were navigating the challenges of external pressures and internal doubts. They found themselves leaning on each other more, sharing small stories, confessions, and laughter, as if anchoring themselves in a world that often demanded too much. One afternoon, a customer spilled a drink near their table, creating a minor chaos in the shop. She rushed to help, but he moved faster, carefully guiding the customer and calming the situation. She watched him, impressed not just by his efficiency, but by the gentle patience he exhibited. A side of him few outside the coffee shop had seen. Afterward, he sat back down, coffee in hand, and let out a long sigh. I didn't realize how much energy I give to the world outside, he said quietly. Here, with you, it feels lighter. She smiled softly. That's because it's real here. No expectations, no judgment, just people being. People, it was true. The shop had become their sanctuary, a place where they could exist as themselves without masks or facades. The connection between them was no longer just about small talk or fleeting moments. It was about understanding, trust, and the quiet power of presence. One evening, after the shop had closed, he lingered longer than usual. The streets were nearly empty, the city lights reflecting in puddles from the earlier rain. She stepped out to lock the door. They walked together in the soft glow of the streetlights. You know, he said quietly, I've been thinking a lot about us, about how different our worlds are. She looked at him, careful with her words. I've been thinking about that too, she admitted. It's not simple, but some things, they feel worth it, don't they? He nodded slowly, considering her words. Yes, worth it, even if it's complicated. They walked in silence for a few moments. the city around them moving in its usual hurried rhythm, but they were in a bubble of calm. It was in these walks, these quiet exchanges, that their bond deepened. Words were not always necessary. Presence alone was powerful. The following week brought another challenge. He received news of a work crisis, a situation that required his immediate attention and presence in meetings across the city. The stress was visible, the usual calm replaced with tension and urgency. She noticed the worry in his eyes and the way his shoulders tensed with every call. "I don't want to leave you," he said one morning, his voice low, almost vulnerable. "I feel torn. My work demands so much, but I don't want to lose this, or you." She reached out, placing her hand over his. "You won't lose me," she said softly. "Life will demand things, yes, but what we have, that's ours. It won't vanish because of work or gossip or outside pressure." He looked at her, eyes searching, as if looking for reassurance he wasn't sure he deserved. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm doing the right thing," he admitted. "If I can even fit this into my life without breaking everything else." "Love isn't about perfect timing," she said quietly, her tone gentle but firm. "It's about finding the moments, the courage, and the will to make it work. And we can. We just have to decide it's worth it." Her words seemed to linger, settling in the spaces between them. For the first time in days, he exhaled fully, a small smile forming on his lips. "You make it sound simple," he said, though he knew it wasn't. "Simple doesn't mean easy," she replied, smiling softly. "It just means possible." The days that followed were filled with a mixture of tension and warmth. Challenges continued to press in from the outside work demands, societal expectations, the quiet gossip of those who didn't understand, but inside the coffee shop, they found a sanctuary. Here, they could be themselves, share their fears, laugh, and simply exist without judgment. One rainy afternoon, as she handed him his coffee, he looked at her with an intensity that made her heart skip. "I've been thinking," he said softly, "about how rare it is to find someone who sees you, really sees you. Not just the surface, not just the title, but the person beneath. You see me like that?" She felt warmth spread through her chest, a mixture of surprise and understanding. "And you see me too," she said quietly. "Even if our worlds are different, we see each other." He nodded, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Yes, and it matters. More than I realized it could." It was a small acknowledgement, simple yet profound. In the quiet of the coffee shop, amidst the soft hum of machines and the gentle chatter of customers, something deep and meaningful was taking root. It wasn't about grand gestures or dramatic declarations. It was about connection, trust, understanding, and the quiet courage to care for someone despite the challenges of the outside world. That evening, as the shop closed and they walked together into the dim glow of the city lights, the bond between them felt stronger. The challenges of life outside hadn't disappeared, but they no longer felt insurmountable. Together, they were discovering that love and connection weren't about avoiding difficulty, or about facing it with someone who understood, supported, and valued you. The mornings continued in their quiet rhythm, but something had shifted. The connection between them had grown deeper, stronger, and more resilient. They had shared laughter, worries, small moments of joy, and even the weight of the world pressing down on them. In the midst of the city's noise and rush, their bond had become a sanctuary, a place where time seemed slower, and the world outside mattered less. He arrived one morning, carrying his usual briefcase, but moving with a lighter step. The tension that had shadowed his features for weeks seemed softened, replaced with a subtle warmth that she noticed immediately. She smiled at him, a small, genuine smile that seemed to brighten the shop, and he returned it, almost shyly, as if he too felt the weight of the change between them. "Morning," she said softly, setting his usual coffee in front of him. "Morning," he replied, his tone quiet but filled with something more. "Better day today," she nodded, pleased, sensing that whatever had troubled him before was easing, even if just slightly. He took a slow sip of the coffee, savoring it, letting the warmth spread through him. It was a small ritual, but one that had come to mean more than just caffeine or routine. It was a moment of connection, of shared presence, of peace amidst the chaos of their lives. Over the next few days, their interactions grew more playful, more personal. They talked about their favorite memories, the little quirks of the city, even the small absurdities of their own routines. He laughed freely at her gentle teasing, and she smiled more easily at his dry, subtle humor. It was a rhythm they had cultivated together, a space where they could be themselves without fear of judgment or expectation. One afternoon, the coffee shop was quiet, the city outside draped in a soft, golden light as the sun began to dip toward the horizon. He stayed longer than usual, lingering over his coffee, seemingly reluctant to leave. She noticed the faint tension in his shoulders, the way his fingers drummed absent-mindedly on the table. "You've been quiet today," she said gently, moving closer. He looked up, eyes meeting hers, and for a moment there was silence. Then he spoke, his voice low and steady. "I've been thinking about us. About everything we've shared all these weeks. About how rare it is to find someone who truly understands." She felt a warmth spread through her chest, her heart beating a little faster. "I've been thinking about that too," she said softly. "It feels special, doesn't it? How we've found each other in the middle of all this chaos." He nodded, taking a deep breath. "It does, and I don't want to lose it. Or you, I've realized. I want more than just these mornings. I want us. Really us." Her eyes widened slightly, a mix of surprise and quiet joy. She hadn't expected him to put it into words so clearly, but now that he had, there was no mistaking the meaning behind them. She felt a tear prick at the corner of her eye, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming weight of something beautiful finally being acknowledged. "I want that too," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "I've felt it for a while, but I wasn't sure if it was real or if it could last." He reached across the table, taking her hand gently in his. The warmth of his touch was grounding, a quiet reassurance that they were no longer just two people sharing fleeting moments. They were connected, truly and deeply. "It is real," he said softly, "and it will last. We'll make it last no matter what the world outside says." From that moment, things began to change in subtle ways. Their mornings together became less about routine and more about intentionality. He arrived with a small smile that spoke volumes. She greeted him with a warmth that reflected the growing bond between them. They laughed more freely, shared stories more openly, and savored the quiet comfort of simply being in each other's presence. But life outside the coffee shop was still there, waiting with its demands and pressures. Work responsibilities called him away, and moments of doubt occasionally crept in, but they faced them together. He learned to rely on her support without feeling weak, and she learned to trust that their connection was strong enough to weather the uncertainties of the world beyond the shop. One evening, after the shop had closed and the streets were quiet, they walked together beneath the soft glow of the streetlights. The city hummed faintly around them, but for the two of them, it felt distant, unimportant. They talked about their dreams, the things they hoped for, and the lives they wanted to build, not just individually, but together. "I never imagined finding someone like you," he said quietly, his voice filled with wonder. "Someone who makes me feel at home, even when everything else is chaotic." She squeezed his hand gently. "I feel the same," she replied. "It's like we've created our own little world, where we can be ourselves without fear." Their conversations grew more personal over time, exploring the depths of their emotions, the fears they had carried alone for so long. He shared moments of vulnerabilities, his doubts, his insecurities, the loneliness that had shadowed him even in success. She listened without judgment, offering empathy, understanding, and quiet reassurance. In return, she shared her own dreams, her own fears, and the small joys that made her life meaningful. It was in these moments that they realized
Our love wasn't about grand gestures or dramatic declarations.
it was about being present, offering support, and finding beauty in the small, everyday acts of care. It was about trust, understanding, and the quiet courage to share one's heart fully, without holding back, As the weeks passed, their bond strengthened further. They began to blend their worlds in small, meaningful ways. He introduced her to aspects of his life that were usually closed off, sharing experiences she had never encountered. She introduced him to the simple pleasures of her world, showing him that joy could be found in the ordinary, the small and the quiet. One rainy afternoon, they found themselves sitting together in the coffee shop, watching the rain streak down the windows. He reached across the table, brushing a damp strand of hair from her face. "I want to be with you," he said softly. "Not just here, not just in the mornings. I want us fully, completely." Tears welled in her eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming happiness of hearing the words she had longed to hear. "I want that too," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I've wanted that for a long time, but I was scared it wouldn't be possible." He smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile that made her heart flutter. "It is possible," he said. "We'll make it possible, together." From that moment on, their relationship transformed. It was no longer confined to the small hours of the morning or the quiet moments in the coffee shop. They spent more time together outside of work, exploring the city, sharing meals, and discovering new places. Every moment was filled with a growing understanding, trust, and affection. Yet, despite the joy, challenges still arose. Gossip persisted, work responsibilities called him away, and moments of doubt occasionally crept in. But they faced these challenges together, finding strength in their bond. Each obstacle became an opportunity to demonstrate care, support, and commitment. One evening, as they walked hand in hand through a quiet park, he stopped and turned to her. "I want you to know something," he said softly, "that no matter what happens, I'm here. For you. For us. Always." She looked at him, her eyes shining with emotion. "And I'm here for you," she said. "Always." It was a simple exchange, but it carried the weight of every challenge they had faced, every moment of doubt, and every shared smile, laugh, and tear. It was a promise that neither would forget, the foundation on which their love could grow. In the weeks that followed, their connection deepened even further. They celebrated small victories together, supported each other through setbacks, and continued to discover the beauty in the ordinary. Every coffee shared, every laugh, every quiet moment became a building block in the structure of their love. The coffee shop, once just a place of work and routine, had become their sanctuary, a symbol of how love could flourish in the most unexpected places. It was here that they had found each other, had nurtured their bond, and had created a space where their hearts could truly be seen and understood. One morning, as the sun rose over the city, casting a warm golden light through the shop's windows, he looked at her with a quiet intensity. "You've changed my life," he said softly. "You've made me see things I never noticed, feel things I thought I couldn't, and hope in ways I forgot how to. I can't imagine my life without you." Her heart swelled with emotion. "And you've changed mine," she replied. "You've shown me a world I never thought I could be a part of. It made me feel important, loved, and understood. I can't imagine my life without you either." They sat together, holding hands across the table. The quiet hum of the coffee machines around them, the city outside slowly waking up. It was a perfect, simple moment. But it carried the weight of all they had shared, all they had faced, and all they had built together by the end of that day. It was clear that their love had become a force in their lives, steady, resilient, and heartwarming. They had faced challenges, moments of doubt, and the pressures of two very different worlds. But they had done it together. And in doing so, they had discovered a love that was real, deep, and enduring in the quiet of the coffee shop. Amidst the aroma of freshly brewed coffee and the soft chatter of the morning crowd, they had found each other. And as they held hands, shared smiles, and exchanged quiet words of care, it was clear that this was only the beginning of a life filled with love, understanding, and shared moments of joy. Their story, which had begun with a spilled cup of coffee and a simple act of kindness, had blossomed into a heartwarming romance that transcended differences, defied expectations, and proved that love can be found in the most unexpected places. Nurtured by patience, understanding, and the courage to open one's heart,